Okay, that's better. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So, good evening from me. I'm here with Dr Victoria Humphreys. We're out guiding a walking Ypres tour on Flanders Fields. We've been out today walking Passchendaele, haven't we, and Polygon Wood. And we're standing, just to kind of so you can see, we're standing just outside the new Commonwealth War Graves Commission Visitor Centre that's directly opposite the Menin Gate, which is just behind us over there. If you've not been in the new visitor centre there, it's about to shut, so I can't take you inside, but it's got a very comfortable series of seating, and there's some very helpful information in there, and you can buy some quite nice kind of little souvenirs, and there's some really good little pamphlets about individual cemeteries where they highlight aspects of that. So we haven't done one of these for 2 years, and there's all kinds of problems. Like I'm about to be mown down by a car. I'm standing in the street. There's all kinds of problems with doing this live under these circumstances, and it's the summer and it's busy, but we're going to kind of give it a go, and we've still got kind of people coming in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and turn this around. Yes, so there we are. So here we go with the Menin Gate. So this is the state of the Menin Gate at the moment. Let me just see if I can come out of that. No, okay, there we go. There's the Menin Gate at the moment. It's still covered in scaffolding, and as you can see, if I kind of go up there, there's a big old crane above it at the moment that's kind of doing work. And Ypres very busy. We can see the kind of bars that I know some of you go to across the road, very busy at the moment. The visitor centre here is about to shut. And what we're going to do is kind of have a wander over to the gate so you can see what the kind of state of play is at the moment. Because I know many of you are far away. We've got, as usual, podcast supporters from not just across the UK, but from all over the world. And we're going to not get stopped, but we're going to go through and into the gates. So at the moment, there's traffic coming through here. Certain traffic can still kind of go through the middle of the gates. It's shut from this side, so it's one-way traffic only. And then you've got these kind of walkways, which have been here since the work started. So you may remember I recorded something kind of walking through these, saying how strange it was to kind of put your hand here, knowing that on the other side of this are panels with the names of those soldiers who are kind of recorded here. So I'm just letting a few more in. Bear with me. So we're going to come through into hopefully a slightly quieter part of Ypres. And as we come into the middle part of the gates here, we can see this area is pretty open at the moment. And if I can just ask those of you who had just joined, if you don't mind muting yourselves, because I can't do it tonight, unfortunately. So the middle part of the gate here is open. We can go up to those cylindrical vents in the roof, the vaulted roof of the gates. They're covered over at the moment, but the central part, and this is where they're having the last post at the moment. So currently, the last post has moved to its traditional location. It's still, you can just see perhaps the little kind of circle in the middle of the road there, just in there, and it's being held there. And last night when we were here, this was absolutely packed with people attending the last post. It's busy with people on holiday, but there's still a lot of battlefield pilgrims here who are visiting the old front line. The thing that's still closed are these walkways. It looks as if that's open, but if I come up to it here, it's a photograph of it, because my hand is on there now. So that's a panel with a photograph of the steps. So it's a strange feeling for me, actually, because just behind there on the right hand side are the Royal Sussex names. In fact, you can almost just see it on the lettering there, Royal Sussex Regiment. So a lot of the old South Downs lads who survived Richbourg only to be killed in Flanders are behind there. That bit's still undergoing a process of renovation. And the same is true on the other side of the gate over there. But nevertheless, for the first time in what, 18 months, we can see names on the wall. We're kind of reconnected with the missing of the Ypres salient. And today we've been walking Passchendaele. We started off at Tyne Cot and we walked down into marsh bottoms and water fields in the kind of approaches where the Canadians formed up for the attack there during the Third Battle of Ypres on the 30th of October 1917, and then made their way up that valley towards Cress Farm, which they reached on the 6th of November, and then Passchendaele village 4 days later. And many of the Canadians who are commemorated on this panel here are men who fell in that ground where we were today, including this. This is the panel for the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's Major T.M. Papineau, MC, on there. That's Talbot Mercier Papineau. As I was saying to the group today, he's kind of been one of my lodestars, really, in terms of the First World War. He wrote this incredible series of letters to his mother, and he was an original officer of the battalion. The battalion, Princess Patricia, was the daughter of the Governor General of Canada, and the regiment was raised in her honour. The Governor General was a grandson of Queen Victoria, and Princess Patricia was his daughter. She was a British princess, and the regiment was raised in her honour. In fact, they said in the early days there was a rumour that whoever won the first Victoria Cross in the battalion would also win her hand in marriage. Now that proved not to be correct, but it meant that a lot of these lads pulled incredible stunts to try and win the VC, but actually ended up being killed in the process. But Papineau served with them originally, got the MC at Ypres in its early period of service. And then after the Battle of Bellewaerde, he ended up on the staff where he didn't really like that job because rather than being in the front line, he was a staff waller, and he kept on putting in requests to rejoin his unit, and that didn't happen until 1917. And then he was killed in the opening stages of the Canadian attack on Passchendaele, blown apart and identified by his puttees and buried on the lip of a shell hole, but his grave was not found after the war, which is why his name is on the memorial here. So he's someone that's fascinated me for a long time. My daughter, Poppy, one of her middle names is in memory of Talbot Papineau. And one year, many, many years ago, I stood just here, and Taff Gillingham was here with a film crew. They were making a Canadian documentary about the First World War, and he came up to me, he said, "You're interested in Talbot Papineau, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "This is Talbot Papineau's great-granddaughter." So I met his great-granddaughter, which was quite something. And that was, unbeknown to me, was being filmed and appears in some Canadian documentary about the First World War. So a few people occasionally kind of pop up with that and remind me that I was in it a long, long time ago. One of the panels that we can't see under here is a panel that a chap who travelled with me many years ago, he was coming through the archway there. There's still people coming in, that's why I keep pausing to admit them. He was coming through the archway there, not in recent times, but 80 years ago in September 1944, he was in a transport unit heading up to Arnhem for the Operation Market Garden, and his truck came down the street there through the archway, suddenly realised it was at the Menin Gate, knew his dad was on here, knew which panel his dad was on, jumped off the back of the truck somewhere over there, and then ran across here to go and see his father's name on the panel that's just behind the scaffolding here, touched his dad's name, ran down the road, jumped in the back of a truck, next stop Arnhem. Well, next stop probably Eindhoven or Nijmegen, actually, but you kind of get what I mean. So those kind of stories are done. In terms of that generation itself is now kind of fading away. So that's kind of where we are with the actual memorial itself. This work is going to go on, I think, for at least another year until these kind of side areas are open, so you can access them again. And the roof will then be changed, and there's going to be a garden on the roof of the Menin Gate, with walkways over it, so you can look down through those vents in the vaulted ceiling there. And hang on, I'm pressing the wrong buttons there. And see that, but that's something that I don't think will be open to the general public. So what we're going to do, because it's a bit echoey in here, and I'm not sure what the sound's like your end, we're going to go through this next bit here, out to the far side of the Menin Gates. There's a fair few of you there. I haven't quite worked out how to get the main picture as the main screen. Anyway, we'll kind of worry about that down the line. It's interesting, here we are in kind of high summer, and already the kind of evenings are beginning to draw in, the lights changing. And I saw some swifts and swallows today as we were walking the battlefield at Passchendaele, kind of wondering how much longer they're going to be here. And I think doing what we've done this week has kind of brought up quite a lot of thoughts, isn't it, really, about the First World War. One of the things that we've been doing, Victoria's kind of background, as some of you may know, is writing, creative writing. She's published her first novel, her second novel's coming soon. So we've been doing quite a lot of readings, or she's been doing quite a lot of readings connected with this. So we thought what we'd do is kind of tap into a bit of the poetry connected to sacrifice, and one in particular connected here to the Menin Gates. So, thanks for having spent all day plodding Flanders fields with me. You've volunteered to come down and talk to these fine ladies and gentlemen, and I thought we'd have kind of a little bit of poetry there.
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, I have not been plodding. I have been gracefully walking Flanders fields.
Of course, you've been gracefully walking.
No, so yeah, we've done a lot of poetry this week, but when you come to Menin Gate, you really have to read Siegfried Sassoon's On Passing the New Menin Gate, and I expect it will throw up some questions afterwards. But if I read it, and then we'll go from there. Glasses, excuse me. Who will remember passing through this gate? The unheroic dead who fed the guns? Who shall absolve the foulness of their fate? Those doomed, conscripted, unvictorious ones? Crudely renewed, the salient holds its own. Paid are its dim defenders by this pomp. Paid with a pile of peace-complacent stone, the armies who endured that sullen swamp. Here was the world's worst wound, and here with pride their name liveth for evermore. The gateway flames was ever an immolation so belied as these intolerably nameless names. Well, might the dead who struggled in the slime rise and deride this culture of crime. I think I added a word to that.
Possibly, but kind of, and I'm hoping this one's going to work. There's too many buttons on this mobile version. There we are. So there we are again. So hang on, we've got more people coming in. So kind of when we read that, it's quite a bitter kind of account, isn't it, of Sassoon's thoughts on this. He saw it as this kind of sepulchre of crime, that somehow it wasn't worthy of the sacrifice that these men had made. And this is something we've been talking about today, isn't it? Kind of, how do you commemorate these men? For him, it was a bitter experience.
Well, the way I kind of read it is when you look around the graveyards, the majority of the men who've had their lives stolen from them are in their youth, at the beginning of their lives, and they've paid for it, and and what they get for it is a name on a wall, and that's how I see it. And it reminds me, when I was at school, we were learning about communist Russia and this kind of idea that in communist Russia was fair because everybody had the same apartment, had the same square meterage, it had the same apartment block. But what it didn't really take into account was that some people were better off than others because of the view that they had. So some people had a view of the garden while others had a view of the garages or the bins or whatever it may be. So there wasn't parity just in the view from the window. When I walk here, and I've got a great uncle who's on the Thiepval Memorial, as you know, and he's just out of reach. And it really bothers me because I want to touch his name. So when you walk into the Menin Gate, some names are at eye level, some names can be touched, some names can be noticed and read every single day by anyone. But the names at the very top, I mean, you can't even see the names, you can't touch the names. So there's a lack of parity there. So I feel like, okay, this Menin Gate's trying to commemorate every name, but is it really if you can't see them? So some men have disappeared, they don't even have a grave, and then they've disappeared a second time because their names can't even be seen. That's just something that I've been thinking a lot about this week.
Yeah, I mean, the guy I mentioned, he was a Second World War veteran who jumped off the back of the truck. He was able to rush up to that panel where the Queen's Regiment is there, and because his dad's name was low down, he could physically touch it.
Yeah.
But if his dad had been right at the top of that panel, it wouldn't have had the same kind of impact to him. So,
yeah.
Some memorials, the names are lower, but here, it's not like that, is it?
No, and I think people will say, well, what's the answer then? I don't profess to have the answers. I'm just trying to, I'm thinking about what Siegfried Sassoon is saying. And then I'm thinking about this wall, and I know it's like a double blow, because, you know, these men are lost to the mud. We've been talking about mud a lot, and we've had so many readings last week as well when we were on the Somme, and how these kind of men disappeared into this kind of human soup in these shell holes, and etc. And then they're kind of lost again. And so it's yes, the double blow is not enough really to describe it, but it's like they're being murdered again.
It's interesting because, I mean, certainly there's you can see in Sassoon he was a very bitter kind of individual. Look back on his war experiences and wonder what all that sacrifice and all that service was about. But yeah, I mean, I was here in 1986 with my parents, and there was an old guy wearing a pipsqueak and welfare, the 3 medals of the First World War, standing under the Menin Gate. I mean, those are the days when you could stand under the Menin Gate and there would be veterans here. And I went up to talk to him, and he'd come because he was a gunner in the First World War, and he'd come to see the name of one of his mates who'd been killed in the Third Battle of Ypres. He'd buried it on the grave and subsequently been destroyed. But for him, it was a kind of great comfort that he'd returned here. And although, I mean, I don't know where it was, maybe he had to squint and see that name on the top of the panel. For him, it was kind of a comfort that at least that lad was actually commemorated.
Yeah.
But you do wonder. I mean, we showed them today. We showed them. I wish I could kind of show you this, but I might have showed it in a previous podcast. Even that picture of the lad at Tyne Cot, where his mum's holding a pencil up above his head, where his father's name is listed on the Tyne Cot Memorial panel. So he's standing there, and I'm kind of replicating this now.
Do you want me to?
Have you got a pencil?
Do you want...
Yeah, so kind of like that. Indicating where his dad's name was, and that was the kind of way that they're standing there trying to make sense of it. And I guess it must have been very difficult, really, for people coming back to try and connect that name in stone with an actual person, a person that once lived and loved and breathed and did all those normal things.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's no expectation on them being so far away either, and there'd be no expectation of them being just commemorated on a wall in a foreign land. I don't, you know, and there's that great big gap between when you've seen them last, when they were alive, and then all the things that have happened to them since, and then they just end up kind of being etched on a wall in a foreign place. It must have been horribly difficult, and it just doesn't seem enough. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It just doesn't seem enough. But then what do you do?
What is enough? I mean, I guess that's the thing. What is enough? And it's interesting. We kind of, you know, look up to the gate now, and they're spending probably several million euros stroke pounds renovating this, just as they should do in the kind of approach to the centenary of the memorial. And here we are, you know, that generation who mourned, they've gone. Even the children of the generation that was killed in this war, there's hardly any, if any, of those left now, because to have lost a father in the Great War, you've got to be approaching 110 years old, as we're now in the 110th anniversary of the First World War. I kind of guess it's, you know, I mean, you read John McCrae's poem about "To you the torch, you know, we pass," you know, about this passing of a torch. I guess that's part of it. What do future generations make of this and these long lists of names?
Well, I think it's quite interesting that when we came up to listen to the last post tonight, you commented and said it seems a bit like a spectacle now. I think you know, whilst it's lovely to hear the last post, maybe there's a way of incorporating reading out some of those names and starting to tell some of those stories. Would it really hurt to do that, to just tell a few stories every evening, or just read out some of the names and just keep going through them?
They started to do that actually on certain anniversaries, particularly at weekends. I think they would start to read out some names, but I don't know whether that's something that's happened since, you know, well, since this basically. I guess outside, when it's been outside here, it's been more difficult. But yeah,
Like we do when we take people to the Wall of the Righteous when we were in Paris and outside the Holocaust Museum. I always invite people to go and take a name off the wall, go home and research it and find out what their story is, and
yeah,
you know, maybe do something like that.
yeah. It's interesting, and I mean, I know many people listening here. I can see Yoka on the screen there, who's researched quite a lot of the lads, you know, from his native country, who's on this memorial, who joined Australian and Canadian units, I guess, that are on here. People are researching these names, and I remember, well, it's got to be nearly 20 years ago now, they produced a book highlighting some of the key stories. Maybe it's time, as we move beyond a decade, beyond the centenary, that kind of stuff comes back.
Yeah, but I think also we've talked a lot about Siegfried Sassoon, but the other thing that we try to do is talk about poets that people won't have heard of in order to tell the stories that people won't have heard of. So rather than telling those key stories and those big stories over and over again, let's start telling the story, for want of a better word, of the ordinary soldier, ordinary people like my great uncle, who came from working class background. You know, his story is just as important as anybody else's story.
Yeah.
He paid the same price. He didn't pay less of a price.
No.
He paid exactly the same price. And, you know, he doesn't get the glory or the story, the glory and the story.
The glory and the story.
The glory and the story.
Nice
and yeah, like that. But
Yeah.
you know, and I think it's like, you know, I think maybe we should just start trying to do a little bit more, rather than, sometimes I feel, oh, this is going to sound very judgmental, and I don't mean it to, but sometimes I feel that we maybe turn up here before our tea and we listen and we go, right, we've done that, we've ticked that box, we've paid our respects. What does that actually mean? And I think in order to really remember people properly, you have to know something about them. So a name, just for me, it's just not enough. And so go away, find out these men's stories, and the ordinary too.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of what separates the casual visitor from someone who comes here frequently, I guess, because after a period of time, I don't think you can stand under this gate, and I'm sure many people listening probably will say the same thing. You can't stand under this gate and not be moved by some of these names and not want to find out more about them.
Yeah.
And I know people, I mean, I don't know if any of them are here tonight because I can't see a full list of who's here, but I know people have listened to episodes that we've done. It sounds like a motorboat's coming down, but it's just motorbikes coming down the canal there from it.
They heard me reading poetry.
Yeah.
Down.
Hang on, we've still got some more coming in. Oh, hang on, bear with me. We got the dispatch riders going by. There's still people coming in. Bear with me. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. But yeah, I kind of, people listening to this, I know have listened, for example, to the episode that we did on memorial plaques and has been so fascinated by it that they've then gone out and purchased a memorial plaque because they wanted to have that little piece of history and that little piece of that person that then connected them to a Great War soldier. And they've now gone out and they've visited the grave or seen a name on a memorial. So I kind of think there's all kinds of ways to access this, really, isn't there? So you've got another poem there.
Oh, yeah.
Not Siegfried Sassoon this time.
Woodbine Willie.
Woodbine Willie, who was an army chaplain, famous for going around the trenches, handing out Woodbine cigarettes to the troops. Had quite a long period of service, served here at Ypres on numerous occasions, and left behind quite a kind of legacy of poetry. So what have we got for Woodbine Willie?
I picked this one is because it,
just going to turn that around again.
yeah,
there we go.
The reason I picked this one was because I've lost people recently, very precious people to me. And one of the things that always strikes me when people go is the waste of their knowledge. Where does it go? I'm always wondering that. Where does it go? What was the point, etc., etc. And I think this, to me, Woodbine Willie's kind of on the same wavelength or expressing the same kind of idea, but obviously towards war. And it's just called Waste, and it's very simple. And its simplicity is one of the things I like, because there's power in simplicity. I think sometimes we're not wasting any words here. So it's called Waste. Waste of muscle, waste of brain, waste of patience, waste of pain, waste of manhood, waste of health, waste of beauty, waste of wealth, waste of blood, waste of tears, waste of youth's most precious years, waste of ways the saints have trod, waste of glory, waste of God, war.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of men, I think, decades after the Great War must have kind of thought, what was it all for? I mean, there was a book published in the 30s that was called An All for What? And I think people kind of ask that question. And while we can kind of look at the history of the First World War, and we can reconcile results, victory in 1918 with sacrifice, with learning and all those kind of things, there was always a cost in all of those variables. And the cost was human lives, on monuments like this. And it's hard to kind of square that, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a waste. It's a waste of a young generation with everything to live for. But as I said today, whenever you stand at the grave of a soldier in any war, in any conflict, today as well, you're not just witnessing the death of one person. For many, it's the death of the family. It's the death of the mother or the father or the wife or whoever it may be. It stretches way beyond that. So looking at one person in the grave, it's not enough. And especially in those circumstances, because it's unnatural and it shouldn't have happened. So yeah, it's just a waste of everything, isn't it?
Yeah. We've kind of very much stressed that on this tour, haven't we? I think we must be traffic magnets tonight. It's the noisiest the Menin Gate has been all week, typically. But yeah, we've kind of stressed this idea about the importance of the experience of women in the First World War, haven't we? That we're not talking about women combatants or nurses or anything like that. We're talking about the women who had to deal with the loss of men on this battlefield, whether that is a son or a husband or a father or a brother. It's a lifelong pain for them, however long that life is. And for many of them, there was decades and decades of life ahead. And that pain and that person was never going to go away, was it?
Yeah, and for many as well, as we saw today with that article on Trump's mother, there was an order, really, an expectation of how the mother or the wife should grieve. And that is essentially not to grieve, but to just plough yourself into work and get on with it. Because I suppose, in a way, if we allow people to have that level of grief, then we're kind of saying what happened was wrong and it shouldn't have happened. And it's kind of like a silence. So we've seen it in the war. We've seen combatants silenced in the First and Second World Wars, and we've talked about that a lot on our various tours. And I keep talking about it, and I will keep talking about it because it makes me very cross. But also these women were silenced as well because they were expected essentially not to grieve and just get on with it, and to be grateful that their son died for a glorious cause.
Absolutely. And I think that, kind of standing here in the shadow of the Menin Gate that commemorates 55,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who have no known grave, it's kind of a place to kind of think about this loss, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever we walk through the landscape, I really struggle to reconcile that landscape that I see now with what happened then. I don't know if all these names do it either. For me, it's just through the stories. That's the only way. I have to know someone. I have to know who they are, what they were, what they stood for, and know something about them to understand the loss. I can say, like anyone, well, that's a big number. They all died. That's loss. Yes, of course. But I think that's an easy way. You just then walk away. Okay, that's a loss. It's an acknowledgement. Here they come again. Should we let them go?
We've got the Royal Engineers dispatch riders coming past us again. There's an urgent message for change for HQ on the front line.
But
Still like
let's know the story, then you're not looking away. And we always say that, don't we, on our tour? That, I mean, I always thank people for coming on our tours because they're the people that aren't looking away.
No, and I think people join us tonight are very similar in that we're not wanting to look away, and I think that when you travel to the battlefields for the first time, or whether it's the 1,000th time, I think that you need to keep asking these kind of questions, really, don't you?
Yeah, I don't, I obviously you and I read a lot about this and we come to these places, but I don't ever really, I don't grasp it any the better. I still have the same feelings as angers. I still don't get certain things, I'll just keep trying and I just keep learning. That's all I can do.
So the Menin Gate is kind of, we're going to come back to some questions in a minute, I'm sure. It's all good. We've got not quite a Courcelette sunset above us there. We've got a bit of a sunset coming over the Menin Gate. It's, as I was saying earlier, it's kind of amazing how quickly the nights are drawing in. So I'm not sure how much usable light that we've got. Some of you who've not been here before may not be familiar with these lions. The original Menin Gates, the gap in the ramparts that was here, had these Flemish lions, the symbol of Flanders. I'm just going to switch this around again. There we go. They had these symbols of Flanders. You can see behind me there the lions at the Menin Gate. These are copies of the originals. The originals, battle scarred and damaged, were given to Australia in the 1930s, I think it was, and the originals were on display here during the centenary, and then Australia gave these copies to kind of mark that spot. So it's kind of still got something of what it was, but with the sheeting over the monument like that, you can see it's kind of, the Menin Gate hasn't quite come back to us yet. We've got elements of it, and we've got the last bit of Vauban's fortifications behind us there on the moat around Ypres, but the old Ypres that we knew before this was renovated is yet to return. It will, of course, just like Ypres itself rose as a phoenix from excuse me, so doing that from like a phoenix from the ashes of the Great War. The Menin Gate will rise too, and we'll stand here once more, and we'll see, I guess, not a new Menin Gate, but a refreshed Menin Gate. Now we're going to try and do some questions. I think what we might do is come a bit further up here, and I'll set this thing up on the wall without dropping it into the moat. I think it'll be too dark there. I think we've got some slightly better. And I haven't got my glasses on because I know you're posting questions in the chat. So, you might have to look at the chat then. So, just going to set this up. So, obviously, there's a kind of issue with the sound. I'm not sure how much we will hear you, but if anyone's got kind of any questions based on kind of what we're, will that T-shirt be on offer? Yeah, some of you. Yeah, this is it. This is the the old Frontline T-shirt, the first and only example of T-shirt merch at the moment. We do have a notebook, which some of you have got. Those who came to the meetup on Flanders in earlier this year. But yeah, these will be available at some point. But there's not enough hours in the day at the moment, so that will happen. That will happen. I'm just going to see if I can find a way of accessing the chat. So bear with me for a minute. Typically, the chat is kind of at this angle rather than the other angle. So let's have a look. So if you're not wanting to ask a question, can I ask you to mute yourself, because I can hear conversations and radios in the background.
He moves, and I'm letting everybody else on the coach.
Okay.
So you just never know what was happening behind closed doors.
Okay, hang on, bear with me for a minute.
When you're briefing the sort of eastern flank, there is a bordello which provides you the ideal stand to brief what happens on the right flank of the French.
Right. Okay. I think someone was giving a separate lecture there. There was something about a bordello and a French left flank. I'm not quite sure what that was about.
Hello.
I know the French army. I'm sorry, Alex, if you're here. The French army has always been accused of all kinds of things, but bordellos on the left flank is a new one to me. Right. Okay. Let's see if we can find some of these questions. Let's have a look. We're having to kind of tilt this on its side. I've always thought that for those of us out of sight or touch, it must have been so sad for all their families.
Yeah.
And then someone says, I've thought that myself before at Ypres. Good point. Unfortunately, without an obvious solution. Vietnam and a memorial in America is better. I was at my great uncle's memorial to the missing at Plugstert just 3 weeks ago. He's on the third tablet, but at the top, whilst at least I could see his name, I couldn't touch it. I was at a church in Worcester the other day, St Paul's. Jeffrey Stoddart Kennedy, Woodbine and Willie.
Yeah.
Paul, can you ask? Oh, yeah, something. Can you mute their machines, please? I did manage to mute them at some point. So the lines are made from the same Belgian bluestone as the original ones. That's a good point as well. And I'm intrigued to know which of those very unusual names you chose for your daughter. Greetings from Copenhagen. I'll come back to that in a minute. Put me down for the merch. Post-restoration challenge is telling the stories. Absolutely, yeah. Never forgotten. And you mentioned lesser known poets. Who are some of your favourites? Right, so and let's come back to that. Right, hopefully that works. So in terms of there we go, I'll set that up there. In terms of some of our kind of favourites of lesser known poets, that's a good one.
I tell you what, rather than what our favourite ones are, 3 we discovered today.
Yeah.
Pinecott Cemetery, which I'm going to do some further research on to receive the military cross. That's J.E. Stewart. I've got a Wilkinson and a W.R. Hamilton. So I'm going to be looking up their poetry in future visits. So I'll be going there and I'll be they're all on the wall to the missing. But I'll be going there and I'll be reading their poetry. I'll be making a point of reading their poetry. So that's a nice discovery for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think again, kind of, I don't know how many times I've been to Tyncott, but you can kind of still find things like this. It's how these layers of the old front line continue to surprise you really by kind of things that you hadn't thought about, elements of those layers that you hadn't thought about suddenly kind of veering into sight with the names of 3 lesser known poets that didn't know was there. So
poetry is quite a high form, isn't it? I'm not interested just in poetry. I mean, prose as well. And it doesn't really matter what that is, whether that's a letter, a reflection, all kinds of things. And we did that last week, didn't we? Certainly when we were in Normandy. What's going on?
Hang on. Don't know what's happened there. Hang on, bear with me for a minute. There's too many buttons on this. Oh, we're back again. Okay. I think we're back in the room. Good to see you. We have ways. It's good to see you too, my friend. Hopefully that's kind of. I'm not sure. There we go. That's better. We're back in the room again. Yeah, it's just too many buttons on the phone version of Zoom.
Like last week, we covered some writing of Ashley Bryan, didn't we? Who was a black soldier in. Has that gone funny again?
Keeps coming up with a whiteboard for some reason.
It wants us to give a lesson.
It keeps wanting us to install a whiteboard. So we're trying not to do that because there's enough whiteboards in this world as there is in briefing rooms from classroom to state house probably. So I think it is, isn't it?
Stuff like that. Just what their accounts are. So it isn't just about poetry, to be honest. I mean, poems. I think poems allow people who perhaps struggle to express things ordinarily to express things.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But so we also cover people who just write a letter and say things too. It's not just poets.
No, no. And I think that, you know, because last week we were at Wilfred Owen's grave, and you kind of, you know, if you're looking at a big hitter, you can't kind of get much bigger than Wilfred Owen. But I think there is also, as we've discovered, and I think the group that we had with us last week discovered, there is a power in kind of reading this stuff out loud in the actual place, connected with their space, you know, not just their battle space, but their life space, and in his case, you know, where they are buried today. But there's something quite powerful about that.
It's a massive privilege as well. I always like to touch the grave. I feel very connected to them. It's like, okay, Bella, I'm here, I'm reading your words. Yeah, I hope I'm not murdering your words, but I'm reading your words and you're being remembered. And, you know, we are, rather than giving facts about people, we're hearing them speak. It's the only way that they can.
Yeah, yeah. And poetry is not everybody's cup of tea. We kind of know that, but I think that the poets were a kind of phenomena of the First World War in many ways, you know, perhaps born of a generation, particularly of middle class people who were obsessed with literature and poetry, and then wanted to try and express that in some way themselves during their war service. But we were just saying the other day how few kind of working class voices there are in poetry, and that's what we really struggle to find, isn't it?
Well, and it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's a leisure pursuit. So working class people don't have time to sit and write poems generally, not always, but generally. They perhaps don't possess the education to do that. And they've got to work, you know, and that's what they have to do. So in some ways, writing poetry and the classics, they are the privilege of the wealthy. So this is why we have these kind of war poets that many went to Oxbridge, many knew one another, all connected. I you know, I still want to read their words, because people like Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen are, I think they loved the soldier. They love that rank for them is not so important. So they're expressing probably that shared experience. So through their words, we can see what the experience was for all rather than just for them. And I think they do that. They're generous in that way. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. I could be. I'm not an expert on the war poets, but I think that they're very interested in preserving the memory of ordinary people as well. And that's why you've got Siegfried Sassoon. I think he's bloody cross, you know, that so many good men, regardless of where they came from, that happened to them. And you know, I really love him for that.
If you look at their verse, and it's not, I mean, they're not writing about officers, by officers, about officers.
No.
A lot of it is about the ordinary men. And Sassoon won his military cross on the Somme, not for going out to pick up a fellow officer, but to go out and pick up a corporal who he greatly admired and loved, really, and wanted to try and save his life. Sadly, unfortunately, that wasn't possible, but it didn't stop him from going out there and putting his own life on the line to bring that man in. So we're kind of seeing a lot of that as well. So yeah, I think poetry's got a lot to give us, and with it, as we've done in the last couple of weeks, war writing as well, you know, and you know, I don't want to kind of add to your multiple piles of books to kind of to read, but I'm sure you all want to add to your piles of books and decrease your bank balances further. But you can go back through kind of episodes of the podcast to pick out some of the things. But we've been talking about all kinds of writers in the last couple of weeks, haven't we? From dear old Henry Williamson through to many others besides.
Yeah, and even just like people like my great uncle was taken prisoner of war in World War II, and he was extremely traumatized. He had no education. In fact, he was homeless for part of his childhood. And he lied about his age, and he truly went off to war, and he was captured in Italy. But anyway, and he was in a prisoner of war camp, Stalag 4B, where you can imagine what the treatment was like. He was put up in front of mock executions, all of this kind of stuff, traumatized all of his life. And as an elderly man, he had lots of problems with that trauma. He was kind of fighting himself in his sleep. He was covered in bruises. So he was encouraged to write his war down, if you like, on paper. So that's when we say war writing, we're also interested in that kind of war writing. You know, there's loads, it's littered with spelling errors and grammatical errors and all kinds of things. It doesn't matter.
No.
It's the story, it's being put down on paper, and you know, those are the stories that we like to tell as well. So
Yeah.
yes, we do read the words of these, as I call them, highfalutin, rootin' tootin' people, but we also are interested in the words of people like my great uncle Ron.
Yeah, and the ordinary soldier's experience. We often use that phrase that I've done on the podcast. Ordinary men and women in these extraordinary times of the First World War. Someone asked about the names of my daughter. I'm not going to tell you all of the names of my daughter, otherwise it'll allow you to access her bank account probably. But she has two First World War connected names. One of them connects her to Talbot Mercier Papineau, and the other one connects her to Edward Thomas. Which again kind of fits in nicely with the theme of war poetry that we've been talking about. I'm just going to try and access the chat again because I know there's a couple of more points come up there. Bear with us while we do that. On the subject storytelling about the individual soldiers, I really appreciate the recordings that are played at Tyne Cot. Yeah, I mean those are really, really good. They stopped for a while, but they seem to be back, which is a good thing, where they read the names out.
Yeah, I heard that faintly today.
Yeah, it's quite an affecting voice as well. And I've always been curious about soldiers who served and were architects in civilian life who helped the Imperial War Graves Commission after the war to design and build the memorials and cemeteries. Do you think their stories will be told? I think that's from Philip Walker. Yeah, I mean, Tim Godden has written a PhD on this, and I hope one day that he'll kind of he'll do something with that because it's really important. And I'm probably going to get him back on the podcast to talk about it. Actually,
Jeff Dyer writes a little bit about it.
Yeah, Jeff Dyer in The Missing of the Somme. Yep, definitely. That's a book that if you've not read that, we were reading some of that last week when we were at Thiepval.
Yeah,
it's not a history book, is it? It's
no.
It's kind of travel come journalist's account of it.
Yeah, it's a creative non-fiction account, I think, isn't it? Of,
but a lot to kind of say. How many names on the Menin Gate have now been found? I think it's something in the region of around about 500. And even when the memorial was built, they'd already hang on a minute, bear with me. They'd already they'd already found hundreds of men who were commemorated on here had already been found in post-war clearances. So the Menin Gate was kind of out of date even before it was unveiled by Lord Plumer, who stood just behind us on a podium there and made that immortal statement, "They are not missing, they are here." I don't believe, I asked the Commission this recently, I don't believe they're going to remove any names during this renovation process, that they're not going to take names off the gate. They're going to leave the whole panels in situ. I may be wrong about that, but that was the impression I got from them, simply because on memorials where they've done it, principally Thiepval, it does kind of make them look a little bit odd at times with these big gaps, which are difficult for the casual visitor to understand or kind of even explain to them as well. Do you know when the last name was added? That's a good question. I don't have an answer to that one. There is, I think, on that side of the memorial, kind of over there, the addenda panel. They've added names to it, and certainly as recent as the First World War centenary, where people have put forward cases of men that have not been commemorated anywhere, and the Menin Gate is where they should have been. So, you know, again, this is something that I think you'd all be proud of us. In the last couple of weeks on these First World War battlefields, we've been pushing this idea of the last page of history never being turned. Hang on, there's people diving in and out here. Bear with me. We've been pushing this idea of the last page of history never being turned, and this is really very much part of it. We went to see some of the graves of those Northumberland Fusiliers that were found near Passchendaele and reburied there in 2018. We were kind of looking at that. Wayne says, absolutely fantastic both. Thanks very much. If they aren't removing names, maybe Sorry, that it keeps disappearing from the screen when we see this. Bear with me for a minute. If they aren't removing names, maybe some sort of mark denoting they've found that's denoting that they're found in terms of their status. That's a really good point. And is what the Americans do on their memorials to the missing. We were at Omaha Beach, weren't we, last week, the Normally American Cemetery. And if you look on the wall there's not many on that one, I don't think, but there are these little bronze, like an oak leaf, which is against the name, indicating that soldier has now been found. It's much more common on the First World War American memorials to the missing. And I've always felt it's kind of something that the commission perhaps should have done with these memorials, because I mean it doesn't cost them 1 pence more to have a name on this gate as well as a grave, you know, because they're going to commemorate that grave anyway, and it probably costs more to remove the name and rejig an entire panel. So maybe just leave the name on there and put one of these little rosettes against it. Whether the commission would kind of go in that direction, I don't know. So yeah, so hopefully we've answered I need a dozen or so of your old Frontline t-shirts. Yeah, until they get into you might have to make do with Wales, because until there's probably more of these than there are of these at the moment, but we will get there. I'm just trying to find the right producer of them, so that I don't have to fill my garage full of t-shirts and send them out in the post. Find someone online to actually just kind of supply them directly to you. That's what I'm trying to do. And when I've got a bit more time in the autumn, I will look into that. So I've got a design now, which is a bit of barbed wire, old Frontline podcast underneath it.
Are you going to do different colours?
There'll be different colours, not just blue. You know, you can have whatever colour you want, I would guess, from one of these online shops within reason. Yeah, so that will come. I kind of, you know, I don't want to get into tacky merchandise. You're not going to have baseball caps and all that kind of stuff, and glow in the dark tabards and you know, whatever else. We're not going to do that.
The fact that he said it means he's thought of it.
Not a t-shirt for an ordinary boy, says Peter.
Aye.
They're very good. Good reference to Victoria's book there. Maybe some with the originals. Oh yeah. Well, I think I'd like to think all of you are kind of originals, really, because many of you have been supporting the podcast from the very beginning. And if there's ever a group of young contemptibles or new contemptibles, it's, you know, I'd like to think that we're a part of it, and kind of anyone who feels passionately about the First World War is part of that group, really. You know, whether they support or listen to this podcast or not, there's lots of people out there. And believe it or not, we've got a coach load of people that have never listened to this podcast. How is that possible? Hopefully they're going to come away from this and they're you know, they're perhaps going to listen to one or two episodes. So did you manage to visit the new visitor centre? Hang on. At Listenhurst? No, but we are going there tomorrow. So tomorrow we're doing a walk in Ypres itself. So we're staying at the Novotel just up the road. We're gathering our group in the morning, aren't we? And then we're going to walk them up along the ramparts. We're walking them past the Ypres Times Brewery, not allowing them to go in the Ypres Times Brewery, because I'm not sure we're going to get them out. So it's not like when we came here in March, where we all went in for a tour. We're not doing that tomorrow. We're going to go past it. We're going to talk about the Ypres Times and so on. And then we're going to end up down at the little gate, and then we're going to walk up to the Reservoir Cemetery tomorrow, and then give them a bit of free time. And then we're off to Listenhurst in the afternoon. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they've done with that new concrete structure, with the diorama. And yeah, you're saying it's really good with the diorama, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. Yeah, because it kind of links into what we spoke about with trains at war, and we've done that on this tour as well. So hopefully it will kind of help visualize that for the people who are with us. So there we are. I hope we've kind of answered most, if not all. I mean, the technology has been a little bit challenged. He says, cranking his head around just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So yeah, I'm just going to close that again. Right. Okay. So I'm not even sure what the time is at the moment. No. So anyway, so I think we're going to probably just going to draw things to a conclusion there because the light is going, and there's only a few spots here. I hope this has been of interest. It's kind of not as oh, you've done brilliantly. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's not as kind of fluid as we do it with me sat at home, kind of doing this, but we've done it in real time on the old front line, on the ground at Ypres. So that's not bad. And I'm hoping before this year, it's taken 2 years to do another one of these. I did one 2 summers ago when I was here on a tour. But I certainly hope to do another one from another battlefield sometime later this year, because in this autumn I've got quite a few trips to the old front line planned, and hopefully we'll kind of get another one in. But I don't know whether we'll be graced with the presence of Victoria again, and I think you'll agree it's been great to have kind of someone who's not me being here, and someone also so passionate about the subject who can talk about this really important part of literature and poetry, and also the memorialisation of the dead. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
As my mum and dad would make me say, thank you for having me.
that's perfectly okay. You're welcome anytime. So thanks, guys. We're going to say good night. Go and have a coffee or something in Ypres, and then we're going to be ready to be back on the battlefields again tomorrow. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for all your support. There will be a newsletter this month that you'll be coming to you sometime soon. And then there will be a bonus episode, kind of summer special. When I was a kid, we used to get those Beano summer specials with, or Battle Comic summer specials with Charlie's War in or whatever. It's not going to be quite as good as that, but it'll be a bit of a summer special with extended Q&A. That'll come out sometime in the next couple of weeks. And then the podcast proper will return in September. With some interesting episodes. I've got an interview with John Nichol coming up, who has just written this book on the unknown warrior, which standing in front of the Menin Gate is quite an appropriate kind of thing. So we're going to have a chat with him about that new book, and hopefully we might be able to sort out some kind of competition to win at least one or more copies of that, I hope. So we'll look at that. But for now, cheerio, everyone. Take care. And until we meet again on the old front line. Bye-bye.